Alright, now we're going to talk about some advanced watercolor painting techniques. These advanced techniques focus more on using different brush strokes and using different materials in addition to the watercolors. So typically for the fundamental ones, you're just using your watercolor set, paper towels to dry off brushes, watercolor, variety of brushes in your paper. For this one, you're also going to set it up into the 9 grid, so 3x3 or the tic-tac-toe. Please label the top left corner with your name and advanced watercolor techniques, and then go through and label the techniques as well. So we're going to be using salt, rubbing alcohol, wax resist, saran wrap, paper towel lift, masking tape, scumbling, and splatter. These are some really cool effects that add some variety. They give us a little bit more control over the material and adding textures. So we're going to go through these one by one. As we get started, one of the things I want to talk about is using the trays at the top. You'll notice I have some pre-mixed colors up here. The mixing trays are great for doing large areas if you're going to mix a large surface and you want a consistent wash. Typically what I do is I take an acrylic brush because it has firmer bristles. It doesn't hold on to the water as much, meaning it'll let it go, and I just kind of use as a dropper. I'll drop a bunch of water in there. I'm just creating a small puddle. And then I'm going to add the paint into it. So for this I'm going to make kind of a blue-violet, a little bit of blue. Wash my brush out between mixing colors. And then I'm going to add a violet. And what this is going to do is give me a large mixture to work with. For using salt, we want to have a lot of water in there. The salt's going to soak up some of that water. So I'm just going to paint in a wash. Doesn't need to be perfect, but we want to add a decent amount of color. The darker it is, the more contrast with the salt. So I've mixed a large area in the top. I've added some of the color onto my paper. I'll wash my brush, set it down. In the back of the room, you'll find some containers with some different materials. In the small 2-ounce kind of Dixie cup container, there's some salt. There's enough for each table, so just grab one for your table. You don't need to use a ton of salt. I've made that mistake in the past. On this one, I've actually used quite a bit of salt. It adds a cool texture, but the visuals are kind of not as strong as they could be. I'm just going to add in a few key areas where I'm going to sprinkle some salt. So I'm going to start, I'm just going to do a little pinch. I'm going to add a couple individual pieces over here. I'm just popping it down between my fingers. Then over here I'll add some more. I'll add some heavy duty. And you can see right away how much lighter that area is getting, especially if you zoom in. It's soaking up a lot of that water. This is really a patience technique. It takes a while to dry, especially since you used a lot of water in the watercolor, but it can create some cool effects. So put down a heavy layer of watercolor wash with a lot of water, and then sprinkle just a bit of salt over top of it to soak up some of that area. Place the lid back on whenever you're done, and you can move on to trying your second technique, which is using rubbing alcohol. Now we want to keep rubbing alcohol away from our eyes, and if you have any cuts on your fingers, be very careful, it can sting. So we're going to carefully peel this off so it doesn't splash. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lay down another wash of a color. So I'm going to come back in and activate my red. I'm going to add some more water to the top. Make a nice mixture up here by adding some paint and water. And I'm going to just do a quick wash over this area. Make it a little darker. Now, rubbing alcohol is going to have an interaction between the alcohol and the water. And it's going to create these cool little blossom areas. To add the rubbing alcohol to the paper, we're going to use two materials. You have the option of using either or both. The first one is a Q-tip. These are located back with the blending stumps and the white organizing bins on the back counter. For this, you just basically dip your Q-tip in, and then you can add it in. You can try to draw with it if you want. I really enjoy the little blossoms that occur whenever I put it on there. And then I'm going to save the other side. You can use this Q-tip for a couple colors if you want, but I'm going to save the other side of this for using a pipette. So these have little rubber kind of squeeze tops on them. What you're going to do is put it in, squeeze it, and it sucks up the liquid, and whenever you push it, it puts out a drop. So put it in, squeeze the top, you saw some bubbles, pull it up, it's now filled with rubbing alcohol. So be very careful with this, again, near your eyes. And you can let a drop or two go for bigger areas, again, to kind of create a cool, kind of petri dish effect. When you're done, just squeeze the top, let all the rubbing alcohol out, and then if you want, you can put it into your water, pull it up one, squeeze it out, pull it up twice, squeeze it out, just to clean some of that out. These are located in the painting accessories drawer back beside where we keep the watercolors, so you can use these as well. Just please clean them out when you are done. The third material blew my mind as a second grader. I still remember using this technique in writing hidden messages. And that's wax resist. The wax we're going to get from a crayon. A crayon's a very waxy surface with a little bit of pigment in it. You can use multiple colors. For me, I tend to use white because it shows up really well, and then a darker color over top of it. So for this, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to add a wax design. Now the big thing you want to do is the harder you press, you're going to build up more of a layer of wax. If you're just drawing regularly, let's say I just drew regularly up there at top, it's not going to show up. Some of the water is going to get between. What I'm going to do is do a nice wash over top of this. So for this, I'm going to take a little bit of blue paint. I'm going to water it down. Remember, using a scrap paper is a good way to test how dark this is. So I have a good wash of blue there. I'm going to come in and just paint over, and you'll see that where I really applied the wax, it's moving away from that area, and it's creating a lighter quality. If you want some more contrast, this isn't kind of the perfect resist. You'll notice some of the colors are laying on top. You can come back in with some water and clean it up. We're going to go over a better resist technique here in a moment. But I love this. The wax kind of resists most of the water, especially the thicker you build it up. You get some cool, subtle techniques. The next one is also really fun. I'm going to make a nice wash of our complement with orange here. This is saran wrap, and the folds in a saran wrap can leave some really cool patterns. I'll show you an example of that. Saran wrap, you also have to wait. Once you place it on, it's going to be left alone. So, washing my brush out, put it down. I'm going to grab saran wrap. I have some Reynolds wrap in the back. It has this really cool slider bar. You will pull slider bar over to the left, pull the Reynolds wrap out. I'm going to have to pull this back. I'm going to fold it over, hold it tight around the corner, and then I thought this was pretty cool. This must be something new they developed. You're just going to slide across it to slice it. Now, this is a lot of Reynolds wrap, so you probably won't need that much. It's always a good idea to grab a pair of scissors and just cut it down to a smaller area. Now, this is not an exact science, and we want to make sure our paint is pretty wet when we add it, so I'm going to go back in, add a wash over top. And you can crinkle that Reynolds wrap up, that saran wrap. We're going to place it on top. And what it's going to do is create some cool designs. A good example of this is kind of the way it's blocked in different textures on my watercolor wash. So saran wrap, we're going to leave that until it dries, much like the salt, and then we'll come back and remove it and see what that looks like. Our next technique is using a paper towel lift, and you will notice that I have left some red on the paper. I want to show you how you can do this to previously dried paint. And I also want to show you how you can use it to wet paint. So I'm going to use the red. As we've gone over, watercolor paint can be reactivated. Red will stain, but it can be lessened. So I'm going to try to remove some of this top half and lighten it. To do that, I'm going to go back in. I'm going to add water. Typically, you want to use clean water. This can be dangerous. A lot of people will really scrub their paper. I'm not really using a lot of pressure on this. I'm just adding water. I'm not pushing down into it or scrubbing it off. I'm just laying water on top. As that color gets lighter, I'm going to take my paper towel, preferably a dry edge. I'm going to press that on top. When I pull it up, you will see it's significantly lighter. So you can go in and do this. Our watercolor paper is not the highest quality watercolor paper. It's a good quality, but it's not the highest quality. So if you do this too much, your paper may rip. Adding too much water can make the paper flimsy. I want to show you this also. I'll use its complement green next to it just to show you how you can do this in the painting. So I'm going to add a lot of paint into this, make it pigment saturated, really make it solid. And then you can go in with your watercolor and use it kind of like the saran wrap. Press it down, it's soaking it up, and as you remove it, you can get some cool kind of resist effects. For other resist, we have our blue painter's tape. This is great for the masking tape one. Peel a little piece off. You can use scissors to cut unique shapes. You can also use X-Acto blades. So I'm going to cut a little triangle here. I'll place it on the paper. The important thing with this is to go around your edges with your finger. So I'm pressing down, getting that nice and secure. And then that should resist most of the water. Sometimes stuff will seep under those edges, but for the most part, you're going to end up with a pretty solid outline. So I'm going to come in and start picking up some of my variegated techniques. So as I finish this up, I'm going to add in some different colors, mostly close to one another, and build up around it. So I'm going around the analogous there. I'm going to add in just a yellow. Got kind of muddy. So I'm going to let that sit, and then I'm going to remove it, and you will end up with a resisted shape. So you'll notice sometimes it goes in a little bit under, but mostly you get crisp edges. The next one is scumbling. Scumbling is a great way to layer different textures and colors. So what I'll typically do is for a tree, I might put down a base color, and then I will add layers on top of it. So I'm going to return to this in a second once this gets to dry. Basically, scumbling is layering different brush strokes of colors to get some different transparent effects and different textures. So I'm laying down that color. I'm going to use this green for splatter. So splatter can be really fun. Just load your brush up with a lot of water and just tap it. Now you might want to block off some of the other areas as it goes. So scumbling, typically for scumbling, I will go through and I will use a flat, dry brush, and I will layer an opposite or analogous color to get darker versions of it. So I'm going to add a little bit of this. And I'm going to come in and I'm basically just tapping it over. What scumbling is relying on is it's allowing me to build up texture with small brush strokes, and some of my green is showing through. So this is really good for layering leaves and other details in there. So going through and layering will create a scumble effect. The last thing we want to talk about is what to do with the top of your tray whenever you finish up with these paper towel techniques and painting techniques. Basically, you take your paper towel, you may need a couple. I ask that you wipe these out or rinse them out in the sink so that they're completely clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this back to the sink, I'm going to dump these out, and then I'm going to wash them. Those are the advanced painting techniques. Try all 8, show them to me, and then we'll be talking about your final watercolor painting. Thank you.